Hello, everybody. My name is Claire Bradley, and I'm the Director of Irish Studies here at the International Institute of Genealogical Studies. Our website is genealogicalstudies.com, where you can check out all of our different course offerings. This is the virtual meeting for Irish Studies in August 2025. As usual, I'm just going to ask if anyone has any questions or comments on current coursework, and I'll give you an opportunity at the end of the class as well after I turn off the recording if you want to ask something then. Oh, no one has anything. That's fine. So actually, this session has come out of something that came up in our last session, last month's virtual meeting in sorry, this is not August. This is September already. Goodness me, it's September 2025. In August's meeting, we briefly discussed the Irish independence movement in relation to the Royal Irish Constabulary. So I thought it was a good time to give you some more information about the background of the independence movement and introduce you to a repository that you might not have looked at before for Irish research, and that is the Irish Military Archives. Now, the Irish Military Archives are a Republic of Ireland repository. So they don't have anything to do with Northern Ireland, they're to do with the 26 counties after partition. And they're based at Cathalbrugh Barracks in Dublin. And so they are a working army base as well as the archives. This is the official archive of the Irish Defence Forces, and they take in material from various military branches, the Department of Defence, and the Army Pensions Board. Now, you might say, Claire, why are you telling me about a modern organisation? Surely there won't be any ancestors here. But the Military Archives also houses material pertaining to Irish independence. And for those people whose ancestors left Ireland in the 20th century, that could be relevant. And of course, there's plenty of people who take courses at the school whose ancestors left more recently, and they might well have relevance for this. So this is also, even if it doesn't pertain to your specific ancestors, understanding the independence movement and how it came about is hugely important for Irish identity and how Ireland understands itself today. So it has historical value, even if it doesn't have genealogical value for you. The Military Archives has a large online collection, but it also does hold material that is only accessible in person or at in their reading room. They also will interact with people by email as well. Now, if you happen to have a direct ancestor who served in the Irish Army post-independence, which is post-1922, you can apply to get his or her military record on proof of descent from that person. So I've actually done that for two different ancestors of mine. My grandfather, often we don't think of our grandparents as being our ancestors, but technically they are. And also my great-grandfather, who's not his father, a different great-grandfather. And that sort of information gave me some, with my grandfather, it gave me information about a man I knew. And with my great-grandfather, it actually was enormously rewarding because prior to getting his army record, I didn't know his date of birth. And once I got his date of birth, that led me off to identifying his birth record, his parents' names, and a lot more information. So it was very, very valuable to me to get this. I did have to produce in each of those cases my own birth certificate, my relevant parents' birth certificate, the relevant grandparent, great-grandparent, and the person whose record it was, their death record as well. So you don't have to give them legal copies, but just you have to show the proof of descent to get those records. Now, everything I'm going to talk about today can be accessed on or via the militaryarchives.ie, which is the URL at the top of the screen there. It's free to use. You don't need to log in. It's just off you go and look at it. But it can be a little bit of a confusing archive to look at, and I admit that sometimes I wish they would restructure it and make it a bit more accessible. Now, I do want to say this, that I gathered that the Military Archives in Dublin frequently gets asked about Irish men who served in the British Army. So they have a big notice in their family history section of their website reminding people that they don't have anything to do with those records, which are held at the British National Archives at Kew in London. And of course, there are many places online that we can look at British Army records. And there were many, many hundreds of thousands of Irish men who served in the British Army over the course of several centuries. But this isn't a place where you can get that information. Even though the Irish Army, when it came into existence in 1922, did ultimately end up taking over many British Army barracks and facilities and so on. But naturally speaking, once the British Army left, the Irish Army took over some of those facilities. Now, they didn't take them over to the same extent because the Irish Army, unlike a larger nation, is a quite small standing army. And mainly our army is used for civil issues. So if there was a flood or something like that. And we also have peacekeepers who serve in Lebanon and have other places in the past with the UN. So we're not a nation that has an enormous army, and we don't have any British Army records in the Irish military archives. We'll do another class on the British records at some stage, though. Okay, so what I want to do in this session is highlight 3 of the online collections that you can use in the military archives. Now, after independence, it was decided to conduct a census of military personnel on the night of the 12th and 13th of November 1922. And this was necessary to judge how they would manage the finances of the new National Army, as well as procurement and provisioning, and just a basic sense of how many guys do we have in which place and what are they doing, and can we count them all, and so on. Now, what's very nice about this is that it is all scanned in colour. It is searchable by name and location, and it's very accessible. I'm going to show you an example of it now. So 1 second. I'm just going to unshare for a second while I find the right thing. I have it open, but inevitably when you try to swap things that you're sharing on a screen, the wrong thing opens up. So I'll just reshare now. Okay, so this is an example of the men who were serving at Moore Hotel in Cork City on the night of the 12th and the 13th of November 1922. And we'll just go through what you can see on the page. It's a lovely high-res scan. Return of officers, warrant officers, non-commissioned officers, and men serving at Moore Hotel in Cork. And their post is the 2nd Eastern Division. And this is the night of 12th and 13th, November 1922. Now, you might think it's a little odd that the men are stationed at a hotel. But remember that in 1922, the British Army was actually still occupying many of the pre-existing military barracks on the island. It took them, even though we had achieved independence at this point, it took the British Army, they didn't move quickly. It took them a little while to get out of all the places that they were in charge of. And so many places that were not normally military installations were used to house the new nascent National Army. So the information provided about each man gives his name. We'll go through it. So we'll just do the top lad here. It gives his name, his rank, so he's first lieutenant. It gives the designation of his company, and so H Company, Battalion 2, the 1st Dublin Brigade. His name is John Grace. He's 21 years old, so very young. And it says home address, and that is Tinnisley, Graignamanagh, County Kilkenny. It gives a reference number for his pay and when he joined. So this phrase attestation means joining up the army. So the date that he joined, 1st of March 1922, so he's only been in the army a few months, and the place that he joined up, which is Beggars Bush Barracks in Dublin, which is actually where my great-grandfather was stationed on this night. And then it asks if he's married or single, what religion is he? And then it gives details of a next of kin. And here it says it's his mother, and her name is Mary Grace, and she is in the same address as his home address. So we get quite a lot of information about each man. And I just want to show you a couple of things. If we just sort of look at the group as a whole, these are all generally very young men. If we look here, 31, 23, 26, 19, 29. So 31 is the oldest of all of them, and many of them are in the first half of their 20s. So this is a young army. And in this case, even though they're serving in Cork, most of them have come from Dublin. You can see here, these guys must be friends because they have they live on the same road in Howth, 70 St. Peter's Terrace, Howth, 50 St. Peter's Terrace, Howth. So maybe they joined together because you can see they joined on the same day. Very young man thing to do. And in this case, this man's sister is his next of kin, and this guy's mother. And then We have a couple of references to people's fathers, where they all joined, and so on. But they're young guys, they're nearly all from Dublin. And there's another guy from Howth. They must have been recruiting in Howth that day. And they any comments as well that they might make. So this, even though it's just a small bit of a small snapshot, and there's obviously not, thousands and thousands of men in the Irish Army at this point, we can go straight from this into other records, because these are all people who would have a birth certificate. You'd be expecting to find them as children on the 1911 census, or teenagers. So it should be relatively easy to identify each of these men on the census and then take them back in time if necessary. And of course, next year we're going to have the 1926 census, so we will be able to take those men forward then as well. So 1922, just another point to say that even if you don't have any ancestors who, your direct ancestors were not in Ireland at this stage, there would be many people who would be the cousins or the siblings or the descendants of people who were directly related to you who stayed in Ireland. And these are the sort of records that we can use to bring people forward in time. And I know when people come to Ireland to do a bit of roots tourism, they always love to try and connect with a cousin in Ireland if possible. And we love meeting those people. I've met several people who are quite distantly related to me over the years. And this is this sort of record that you can do that with. You can find the people going forward in time. So I want to move on to another valuable collection that's held by the Military Archives. And this is, one second, I'll go across back to my slides. The Bureau of Military History. Hopefully that slide has changed. Anyone just give me a shout if it hasn't. Now, what's the Bureau of Military History? This is a very large collection of witness statements, contemporary documents like newspaper clippings, photographs, and voice recordings dating from the period 1913 to 1921. So these relate to the revolutionary period of Ireland's history. So we're talking about the period that covers the Easter Rising of 1916, and we're talking about the War of Independence and the subsequent Civil War, during which we blew up the Public Record Office. So this is a really valuable collection. The witness statements are actually first-hand testimony of people who participated in the independence struggle. Now, there's over 1,700 testimonies from people. And these are men and women were interviewed and questioned closely in the 1940s and 1950s, when the government of the day realised that, hang on, these guys are starting to die off. They have important information. We should record it. Now, it wasn't released immediately. This was only released in more recent times. So their testimonies, they interviewed them, and then their testimony was typed up and they put them away for 50 years. They said, right, no one's going to touch them for 50 years. And then they started to review them, and ultimately they've made the entire collection available for free on the Military Archives website. So these statements provide insight on the day-to-day struggle for independence in Ireland. Now, they often describe terrible events that can make for difficult reading, especially if someone is to discover a family member who had been a perpetrator of a terrible action. And of course, when you're talking about a civil war, there's always terrible things that happen on both sides. It also must be remembered that the statements were given several decades after the events occurred, and so recollections may vary. And the collectors of these testimonies made no attempt to reconcile different accounts of the same event. So if one guy went along and interviewed some old man about a thing, and then later he interviewed somebody else about the same event, he wouldn't go, now Peter said something different there. They didn't do that. They just took the document, they took the information, and they put it away. And they left it for historians and the future to analyse and interpret. So the witness statements are indexed by the names that are in the document, as well as the person who gave the account. So, for example, if you were to look up Michael Collins, who was a very famous member of the leadership of the independence struggle, you would get his name all over the place. He'd be in lots of different documents. But he didn't live long enough he died during this period, so he doesn't have a witness statement himself, but he's mentioned all over it. But you will also get a couple of other quirks in it. One is that if a woman and there were plenty of women who were involved in the independence struggle, and quite often they were not yet married women. But if they were subsequently married, then their testimony is indexed as Mrs. Husband's name, which is appalling. So you might get Mrs. Michael Murphy, when in fact she was Miss Mary O'Shea when she did the activities that she is giving testimony about. So you need to know, if it's a woman, you need to know what her husband's name was as well. And there's an example that I have of a testimony from Mary Josephine Mulcahy, who was the wife of General Richard Mulcahy, who was one of the most senior figures in the independence struggle. And she was involved with the women's organisation Cumann na mBan in 1915 and 1916. So she wasn't actually married at that stage. So it does slightly irritate me that they don't go to the trouble of indexing her with her birth name, Mary Josephine Ryan, as well. You could index her under both very easily. And in fact, nearly in the first the first line of her document, she does actually name her father, and I'm going to show you that as well. So her father's name is there for you to see. So we'll have a quick look at one of these. So just zoom it up. So you can see there on the front page, Mrs. Richard Mulcahy. Strike a blow for feminism there. And she was the secretary of Cumann na mBan 1915 to 1916, which is a senior position. And she was also a courier. So women were often used as couriers. And you can see that she was active during the Easter Rising, where Enniscorthy was one of the places outside Dublin where there was a little bit of activity on that week. And so she's giving details of her testimony, and it's all typed up. But you can actually see here in the very first sentence, my family first was attracted to the national movement through my eldest brother, later father Martin Ryan, who was then in Maynooth College as a student. So she actually mentions her maiden name there right off the start, so we can go off and find her. Right, so that's, and this is not a short document, that we're not going to go through it, obviously. It's all nicely typed though, so it's very easy to read. 24 pages. Some witnesses have much larger documents than others, depending on the level of activity that they had. But they're absolutely fascinating. I'm sorry to say I haven't found anybody in my family who has a witness statement, but maybe I will at some point, because they're just so, if you ever want to feel like you've stepped into history, reading a first-hand account of someone's experience of something that's so pivotal in your nation's formation, this is it. It's really, really very important. Okay, so the third and last collection that I want to talk about today is the Military Service Pensions Collection. And the Military Service Pensions Collection covers the period 1916 to 1923. And these are pensions who were awarded to men and women who fought for Irish independence. And this is separate from people who later went on to have a career in the post-independence Irish Army, who also would have, of course, achieved a pension at some stage. The aim here was to recognise and support veterans in the immediate aftermath, as well, especially those who'd been wounded and might not be able to work. And they also awarded medals for service, and they compensated widows and orphans of deceased combatants. Now, applicants did go through an assessment process, and not everybody was successful. Now, the implementation of these pensions was controversial. You might say, why would that be controversial? And it comes down to the sides taken in the bitter Civil War. In the initial phase, after the Civil War was over, no pensions were awarded to people who were on the losing side of the Civil War, as in those people who fought against the Anglo-Irish Treaty, which had partitioned the island. Now, very many of the women involved in the independence movement were against this treaty because they felt that it reneged on the promises of the Easter Rising Proclamation, which had stated that men and women were going to be equal in the new nation, and that wasn't necessarily going to be the case now. So many women, because they were on the anti-treaty side, were not eligible for pensions. So this is quite a disgrace that many women didn't qualify. And it wasn't until much later, in the 1930s and the 1940s that the pension system was revised to include everybody who'd been involved in this period, regardless of what side you'd been on in the Civil War. Now, some women were also denied pensions on the grounds that women could not be soldiers. So sad to say, there's a lot of misogyny in this. And that actually included one of the most famous leaders of the Easter Rising, Countess Markievicz, who was in fact a woman. She was denied, oh no, women cannot be soldiers. That was also why she wasn't executed, because she was a woman. Now, the military archives is still releasing material in this collection. So I think they've had 18 or 19 releases at this stage, but there are still more. So if you follow them on their social media, you will get notifications of when they're releasing new collections. These pension files are again scanned as colour PDFs. Now, they made an interesting decision to scan every single page, even if it's a blank page. So these are huge files. Definitely don't download this on your phone over your data. So there often can be more than one file pertaining to an individual. And these files are a treasure trove of information. They were completed by the person, so you get to see their own handwriting. It includes details about their families, their lives, their experiences in this period. They also have letters from other people confirming the information, like references. Yes, I saw that person on this date in this place. For example, you got additional money if you served in Easter week 1916, and even more money if you could prove that you were in the General Post Office, the GPO, which is the headquarters of the rebellion, which is on O'Connell Street. It still stands today, although it had to be rebuilt after the Rising. And there's a joke in Ireland that everybody likes to say that one of their family members was in the GPO in 1916. And if everybody who said they had an ancestor who was in the GPO, it would be the whole country. They actually did make an attempt a few years ago on the centenary to calculate how many people had been in the GPO. And I think they came up with a figure about 600 over the course of the week. Now, I worked a few years ago with an elderly gentleman, and he told me that his father had been in the GPO in Easter week, and I thought, was he really? Okay. But I'm happy to say that in this case, it was absolutely true. And I'm going to show you one of the files now. And as I said, these are very, very large files. And they're all in colour. So this one has only got 41 pages, but this particular individual had a number of files and they came to something like 200 pages total. So on the first page, you'll see that there will be some words in Irish on these files, but they're usually in headings and you'll usually still be able to figure out what's going on. And you can see that there's also a lot of typewritten information. So they're filling out forms. I'm just going to sort of go through it. So here you can see, just zoom up here, active service at any time during the week commencing on the 23rd day of April 1916. And this man is saying, yes, I was here, I did this. And who was my commanding officer? His commanding officer was James Connolly, who was one of the leaders of the Rising, who was executed. And gives details, people who can testify to your statements, and he gives the names of 3 people who can do it. Sean T. O'Kelly went on to be a very senior politician in Ireland. And so on. And then you can see here, this is one of those blank pages where there's nothing, but they decided to do this because if they just scanned the pages that had text on them, inevitably somebody would come back to them and go, oh, my document is missing page 7 to 9 and what's on that? And so they just said, we're just going to do the lot even if there's nothing on it. So you can see that sometimes it's not relevant at all, and then sometimes it is. And so we come back to this, and then he's giving lots and lots of detail. Every single section he has to give references. And in some of the other documents for him, there are actual handwritten letters by people. Here's one written as a typewritten note from someone who's called Walsh. And he says, ex-minister, I'm not sure exactly what. And it says, this is to certify that this man fought in GPO during Easter week 1916. I was speaking to him there on more than one occasion during that period. So he's backing him up. Here's somebody else backing him up, handwritten document as well. So this is his evidence, and then he's granted the pension. And then here is a typewritten in his own words. So what happened? I went over to Frederick Street at headquarters and stood to all day. We demobilized about 4 or 5 o'clock. We got instructions to keep in the vicinity, and then he goes on and on. So this is like a first-hand account. if you never spoke to the person about it, this is like speaking to them, because it will be very, very detailed, and there will be other documents. And then you can see then the summary of the application, what is he getting, and so on. And then this is the details of the pension that he's going to achieve. So there's huge amount of detail in it. And as I say, this is not the only document for that individual. So, and if people had a family, then that detail is usually recorded in it as well. So lots and lots of good genealogical content in them. So I'm just coming up to the end of my talk now. We'll have a minute or two for questions. In summary, the Military Archives adds valuable insight to Ireland's independence period history. Even if you don't have a direct ancestor who was involved, you may find cousins or other family members who were, and it's absolutely worth your time to investigate it, at least on a historical level. So before I stop the recording, I want to thank you for coming to today's class, which was presented by the International Institute of Genealogical Studies, and you can find us at genealogicalstudies.com.